Good morning, everyone. Hello, hope you're all doing well, and welcome to week 5 of the UBFA module, as we call it. So I can see that we've got Eleanor joining us online. Possibly Michael will join us too in a moment. So what are we going to be doing this week? Well, we've got quite a lot to cram in to this session. The first 3 sections cover an awful lot of concepts and ideas, and in the final part I'm just going to very quickly introduce the business ethics canvas, don't get confused, which we will be focusing on in the workshops this week. So let's make a start, exploring ethics in business. So when I was preparing this session a number of years ago, one of the first things I did, which is what I know you all do when you've got your assessments coming up, you often Google something. And so I typed in business ethics is, thinking let's find a nice little definition. And as you can see, I've circled there this little word, oxymoron, okay? You really need to understand your English grammar to know what that means. But an oxymoron basically means you have 2 things that don't go together. In other words, business and ethics don't belong together, is the suggestion from that term, an oxymoron. So I thought that was an interesting place to have started. And as we go through, you may well get an appreciation of why that may have come up in the search terms. Why might some have said that business and ethics don't belong together? Okay, so let's look at some definitions of business ethics. Okay, this quote here essentially says that ethics isn't just something that's for business, but actually it applies throughout our lives. And this second definition, I think for me summarises the whole angle of what ethics means when applied to business. It basically means, let me just climb out of the way, there we go, basically means that you are not being selfish in your interests and only looking out for yourself, but you are thinking much more broadly than that. So let's now have a look at how is all of this relevant to analytics. I have a little video to share with you about how ethical issues surface when you're using analytics. So hand over to my friend Josh, who'll play the video for us. Thank you very much. So that was interesting, wasn't it? The whole point of that was big data models, algorithms, automation, they all lie at the heart of such scandals, okay? And the common denominators amongst those scandals are issues of transparency and trust. And that's where I'm going to go next in this lecture. So let's look at these separately, okay? Transparency and the curse of the black box. The idea of the black box means where a model or an algorithm provides the user with the output without them knowing how it was arrived at, okay? So that's what transparency is referring to. Where you can't provide an explanation, there's a lack of transparency. So you might be saying to yourself, well, how does transparency matter? Well, if you're unable to explain how you've arrived at a result, how can you be confident in the validity of the result, okay? And without transparency, you might be facing ethical issues such as built-in bias around race or gender, and these can go unnoticed. So the example on the right-hand side there was an article that I saw a couple of years ago online that was talking about Just Eat couriers essentially being sacked by AI. Okay, and they couldn't understand why. They couldn't, tracking through their behaviour, they couldn't work out why. And that's what the black box and transparency is referring to. It's not just you the analyst, can you understand what's going on? More importantly, if users of your system, your clients and other stakeholders that are going to be engaged with you in your analytics, if they can't make sense of decisions that are being made by the analytics, the automation, etc., then you've really got a problem there. So that's transparency. Now let's have a look at trust. And I've got a few definitions here. Okay, trust, the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party based on the expectations that the other party will perform a particular action important to the trustor, irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party. Sounds quite legalistic, doesn't it? Okay, but it's basically saying you in situations you trust that people will be working with your interests in mind. Okay. So trustworthiness within organisational systems and institutions, we need it, don't we? We need it for a well-functioning society. But the space that we're working in, there's a related concept there, that is of digital trust, okay? That's about the systems and the platforms that we use in our analytics work and the various technologies that are involved, the organisations providing them, okay? We're trusting that all of the stakeholder interests, our own and other stakeholders involved, that their interests will be protected, okay? So that means that ethics and trust and digital trust are linked. So let's have a little stop and think moment, because I've talked for a bit. So let's imagine that you are a consultant involved in an analytics project. What is it that the client needs to trust, and what attributes do you need to have as an analytics professional? Now, I know I've got Eleanor and Michael in the room now with me, so hey, between the three of us, hopefully we'll see the stream of all of your answers being typed in the chat. So have a little think and just share some of your thoughts with us. What is it that the client needs to trust? You are an analytics consultant engaged in a project. And what attributes do you need for the client to trust you? What do you think about that? Okay, we've got the first one coming in, brilliant. Logic of the process and the result, transparency, understanding the data, transparency of the data. Yep, confidentiality, particularly with respect to the data that's being used. It's great to see that you're thinking really differently, aren't you? Some of you are thinking about the process, some of you are thinking about the relationship with the client, some of you are thinking about the things that are going to go into your models, such as the data. Your ability, yes, your ability to solve the interest, no interest in any output of analytics project. I assume what you mean there is that you will remain objective and that you won't be biased in your expectations of the results that come out. Issues of privacy, confidentiality. Anything that I've missed, guys, Michael or Eleanor, that you've spotted that I haven't covered? Nope. Super. Let's move on then. Let's move on.
You act in client.
Sorry, we can't hear you, Michael.
You act in client's best interest was one that was added.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. Yep. Brilliant. Okay. So good to see you thinking of a broad range. So let's now move on and focus in on professional practice. Okay, so what are the ethical responsibilities that analytics consultants have with respect to their professional practice? Just listed a few here of the things that I had thought about. So there's the whole context, related to appreciating the purpose of why you're undertaking. There's the whole ethics around how you design the analytics project. I'm going to focus on the last three. So what are the ethical issues related to data, to the analysis, and to your own professional behaviour? So I'm going to start, as you had all talked about data in your thing. What is it about data that's relevant? I think some of you have already picked up. Let me just go back. So the ethical issues relevant to data that's used in analytics. You said that you need to understand the data. We've already had confidentiality with respect to the data and privacy, security, decision bias, confidentiality. Anything else that you can think of? Someone's typed in there integrity, yeah. It may be that you've already covered all of this. The source, oh, that's a good point. Where has your data come from? And do you trust the source of the data, where it's come from? Yeah. Does it come from, or does it exist, I guess, first of all? And if it does, where is it being stored and how are you going to access it? What was its source? Is it something the company has gathered, or is it something that's having to be gathered fresh? Collection of your data policies, so things like cookies, yeah. How do they work? Your awareness of whether the information is considered private or not, yeah. So are there any things like GDPR that are relevant there? Any other privacy issues? Okay, I think you'd already covered an awful lot of these, so we won't pause too long. We'll move on and think about the application of relevant techniques. So this is a quote that I pinched from Michael that we used last week, which is basically saying, as analytics consultants, you will often develop expertise in a particular technique, okay? And it's very tempting every time you get involved in an analytics project to think of it in terms of that technique, okay? But you've got to remember that the client isn't that fussed about techniques, and that really your job as an analytics consultant is to think about what is the most appropriate techniques to be applying to this problem situation. And that's really what we covered with you last week and showed you how to go through that thinking process of defining the business problem and then think about how that can be translated into an analytics problem framing and then matched to the appropriate techniques to fit the problem. So here's another interesting quote which talks about the management of algorithms. Okay, I'll let you just read that. It's talking largely about AI, but the points really are relevant to any algorithms that you might use as an analyst. And I've highlighted the key bits that I want to tease out, okay? With AI and any algorithm development that you undertake, the verification and validation steps mustn't be skipped. And your client needs to have confidence that you haven't skipped those steps. So what do those terms mean? Okay, they are very different terms. And I think it's useful to think in terms of how they relate to the different stages of the process. So verification to me is all about the internal workings of your algorithm, your models, your analysis. Have you checked that the internal workings is correct? In other words, have you checked the code? Are there any bugs? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Whereas validation is actually about the results that the different stages of your process produce. So is the model sufficiently accurate for the purpose at hand? Now this definition I've taken from Mike Pidd, one of the books that we refer you to occasionally during this module. And this notion of sufficient accuracy, I think, is quite an important one. Because one of the things that we found last week was a tendency to want to model in great complexity and detail. And Pidd has this notion that a model is a simplification of reality, and that what your goal should be is to build the simplest model that you can that helps to solve the problem that you're looking at. Hence the notion of sufficient accuracy. You do not need a model that exactly replicates reality in order to be useful. A model that makes certain simplifications and assumptions can still be useful. And that's why we have this notion of sufficiency, sufficiently accurate for the purpose at hand. Now, how does that all fit with your CRISP DM process, given that you're going through different stages? Okay, 2 points here. First of all, it needs to happen throughout the process. It isn't something that just happens while you're building the code or once you've got the results of your analysis out. You need to be thinking about validation and verification at each of the stages, okay? And if you're going to be iterating through the process, which you may well be, then equally you need to be iterating through validation and verification. So let's now think about, well, what does it look like? I've talked about checking the code as an example of verification. If you're dealing with units within your analysis, then checking that you have kept the same units throughout your analysis is really important. Why am I smiling? I often fall victim of this, and I have to, once I've done something, go back and think, am I using the same units in that equation and that equation, or do I need to do any conversions? Because it is so easy to skip over. You think you know the problem, you whiz through it, you look at the results and you think, oh, that doesn't look right, does it? And you go back and you think, oh yes, I'd forgotten that I had to convert from meters to centimetres to metres, or it's something simple like that often, okay? And it's often in inspecting the output reports that you spot that you've done something wrong. So what about validation? Well, you can think about validation at the different stages. We've talked an awful lot about data, so let's think about here. Understanding where your data has come from, as somebody helpfully mentioned earlier on, okay? Do your EDA, do your exploratory data analysis, plot your graphs, look to see if there are any inconsistencies in very simple visualizations. But really importantly, whenever you are doing coding or if you're using bespoke software or software packages, you have to know how the software interprets the data. How does it deal with rounding, something that you might think is really simple? Does it truncate? Does it round up? Does it round down? How does your software interpret and process your data? What about your algorithms and your models? In week, 3, we introduced you to some problem structuring methods that produced analysis of models. So it's not just the quantitative analysis that needs validating, but then how can you validate conceptual or problem structuring models? Yeah, you'd need to think about that. You may well need to involve the client or the final user of your analysis or your system in helping you through your validation. You need to know any assumptions that you've made in your algorithm. A lot of the statistical analyses you'll be doing will assume normality, won't they? Does that always imply? Can you apply some of the theoretical concepts such as the central limit theorem if you're using sampling? Having an appreciation of the technical assumptions that you're making when you're doing your modelling is very important. You can run different scenarios through your models. You know, what if we were to double the size of the workforce? What if demand were to shrink by half? You could work out what you might expect the results to look like and then see whether your model actually matches those. And in the PID book, he talks about black box validation, which is essentially that. It's essentially comparing inputs to outputs. Now, I'm whizzing through this, I've realised, so I'll slow down a little bit and I might pause because I know Michael has to scoot off at some point. Let's, again, talking about professional practice, many analytics professionals belong to professional bodies. I belong, as does Eleanor and I think Michael, to the Operational Research Society. That's the society that we plugged for you to join a few weeks back. And they have their own principles of ethical practice. So I've included in the slides links of 3 main professional bodies. So Informs is the US analytics, operational research, management science, however you want to call it, society. The UK OR Society is there, but also the Royal Statistical Society Guide for Ethical Data Science. And I think I refer you to that one in this week's quiz to have a little look at what they have to say about their ethical principles or practices. And what you'll notice is that they're pretty much very similar, and it all goes back a very long way. So the Williams reading that I asked you to undertake in preparation for this session talks about the OR Society of America, which is what Informs used to be called. And you can see here at the bottom right-hand side, 1971, okay? Not quite as old as me, but nearly. And the point here is just for you to just scan over these, okay? This is long before AI and analytics were known terms. So you might sort of think, well, these are really old, fuddy-duddy, old-fashioned. But they're not, are they? The first point there, the whole point of us as analytics professionals is that we should apply the scientific spirit. We should be open. We should be explicit in what we do. We should try to maintain that objectivity. Okay? The second point there really speaks to that definition of business ethics about not being biased in our approach. We need to be competent in what we do, and we need to consider the toolkit in its breadth to match to the appropriate problems, because we need to become fully familiar with the problem situation. Okay, so as you read through these, you see actually, although they were written over 50 years ago, they are still highly relevant. But as I said, they don't mention anything to do with AI. So let's fill that gap. Let's fill that gap. And Michael kindly shared some slides he'd prepared for another module exactly about this. So I will talk through them, and Michael will jump in if I've missed any particular points or if he wants to add anything, I'm sure. Give me a nod, Michael. Yeah, thumbs up, well done, okay. So, when we think about your own professional practice, in recent years, I think one of the issues that has increasingly surfaced is how you guys use AI within your studies, okay? So, this is what students have told Michael, and some of them have told me these sorts of things too. So where have you used AI to help? Well, I've used it to help me brainstorm new ideas, okay? But some students have said to me, well, actually, once I've seen what AI has to say, I find it really hard to do any thinking on my own, because I'm constantly thinking about what AI has had to say, and I'm also thinking that I'm losing confidence in my own thinking, because AI is, you know, it searches on all that historic data. It must be better than what I've come up with, okay? And it's very hard, therefore, to be critical and original, is what they're saying. And I think that's a fair point, okay? Secondly, so many students, mostly non-native speakers, say, I want my English to be very professional, you know, so I get AI to check my grammar and to change what I've written so that it sounds better. Do you know, this is so frustrating as a marker, because you read something and you think, well, that wasn't written by the student, because I know that the majority of students don't speak that good English. And what you really need to appreciate is that when we're marking, what we want to do is we want to know what you understand about what it is you're doing. We want to see the criticality, the reflection, the original thought. When you've marked over 100 essays on a topic and they all come across as being very bland, but written in very professional English, but very bland content and ideas, it's very hard for us to give credit for that originality and criticality. Well, I guess what it does mean is that the few of you that don't use the AI do really stand out as being submitting things that are original, showing that evidence of criticality. Michael wants to jump in. Off you go, Michael.
I'd just say, I mean, this is sort of beyond even AI, this particular point, what I was thinking, because sometimes I'll see students and they haven't necessarily used AI, but they've tried to just ape the style of a journal article or a textbook and write it in as much as possible in that way. But all that shows me as a marker is that you can repeat what you've seen in a textbook or in an academic article. It doesn't show me as a marker that you have any understanding of the thing and can apply it. So I think the right words bit is sort of transcends all of it, even beyond AI.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thanks very much there. So what about refining the structure of your work? Okay. Now, the way that AI structures work can be very, very formulaic and it's not very appealing, okay? It may well standardise its paragraphs, okay? What we want to see is what's appropriate. So sometimes you'll want to take a bit of a deep dive into something to back up your analysis or to give a commentary of an analysis and then a critical reflection on it. And that may mean that you need paragraphs of different length or different depth of thought. Okay? And then finally, Michael made this one up, if we're going to throw our hands up. You think that there's an expectation because you want to use it the same way as you have done in the past. Okay? What we'd say here is you are no longer undergraduates, you're postgraduates, and just giving us facts and accurate facts isn't what it's all about. We need to see the original thought coming through. We need to see the critical thinking. We need to see the reflection of your tools. So let's just think for a minute. In your assessment, you need to develop an analytics or propose an analytics project and apply 2 of the themes from the module list to that. Let's say you pick the problem structuring methods, and let's say that you do a multiple CATWO of your different stakeholders, okay? Your commentary needs to tease out the similarities and differences across the CATWOs and may pose a critical reflection as to why they are different. And that is best done by you. It's not best done by some automated software that won't necessarily understand everything. Now, just checking the time there. Michael, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction as to where this comes from? Because that was something I didn't fully appreciate from your slides.
For sure. Okay, so this is Anthropic. Anthropic is the company that makes Claude AI, but they're actually, even though they are, commercially working on AI, they do a lot of research into ethical issues and also appropriate uses of AI and some of the risks inherent in AI as well. There's a short course available, linked in the slide there, where they talk about sort of best ways of using AI as a student and as an educator as well, and how to think about where to plug AI in. Which what you're seeing here is slightly modified with my sort of spin on some of these things, but my thinking is very, very closely aligned to the way they describe it as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So, yeah. That's really, really, really helpful to understand where it's all come from. So, there's this idea that you could describe the fluency of AI using 4 Ds, 4 attributes. The first one being delegation, okay? And the idea here is that you fully understand the problem yourself and you have an expectation of what the results should be, okay? That is true of all analysis that you do. When you are building algorithms and you're essentially handing over the analysis to the algorithms, you will have built an expectation as to the sorts of results that you would see. The other thing of delegation obviously means handing over, getting somebody else to do the work. And the idea here is that you allocate the work to AI that's appropriate for it to do in terms of the assignment brief, your own development, and in consideration of the capabilities of the AI tool. In other words, there are some things that it's going to be useful to delegate to AI, but there are equally some things that it is not going to be helpful to delegate to AI, particularly the original thinking and the criticality and the reflection. Okay? So, under the description characteristic, the idea here is that you need to ensure that you're describing exactly what you want the AI to do in a clear and precise way. Okay, and this is really about the prompt engineering, isn't it? And the quality of what you get out of AI really does depend on what and how you ask it to do things. So the guidance here is trying to give it small specific tasks, that are easy to measure, okay? And in thinking about that, this slide may be helpful to you, okay? Tell it what role you need it to play, summarise the task, or give it the task, for example, summarise, blah, blah, blah. You may well want to tell it on what to focus, so emphasise X, Y, or Z. How do you want to see the output come back to you? In what way do you want it to be written? And I think this is the one where it's often really clear to us that AI has been used because students aren't writing in their natural language, or their natural way of expressing things. They think somehow that we're going to be impressed by business speak. No, we are more impressed when we see you clearly explaining things in your own way. Constraints. Do you need to tell it to avoid anything or to use, a certain number of sentences? It's about giving it clarity. Now, what about this topic? So next one is discernment. Okay. You need to be in charge, basically. You must be the quality control for your work, okay? You need to review anything that AI has generated critically and not just assume that AI has given you something and because it's AI and it's such a massive, massive big database that it must be good. No, we know that it hallucinates, doesn't it? It makes things up. So that means you need to have thought beforehand about what you expect to see. Even if you're not really clear, try to form your own expectations. Okay? And you should expect to iterate. You won't get it right first time. And as you develop your skills, you may well get better. Now, diligence. This is something that definitely is related to the whole idea of ethics, isn't it? We talk about due diligence is a phrase that we say in English. So here, the idea of this characteristic is that you use AI in a thoughtful and in a diligent fashion. You have to be transparent about its use, but also reflective on how it has or has not helped you and where your own contribution lies. Now, to me, this is one of the important things, particularly with your assignments, because you all submit with your assignments, your dissertations, you basically say, I am submitting something that is my own work. All right? And I have used AI in this way. Now, I will come back to your specific assignment for this module in week 10 and give you some guidance about if you're going to use AI, because AI is permitted to be used in our assignment, what is it that you need to declare? And quite often what we see with students is they declare the minimal. And yet it's really clear to us reading the assignment that it's a maximal use of AI in the assignment. So getting that balance right and being honest about how you've used AI, I think is really important. So now we have some examples about these 4 Ds in action, okay, and the way that students may use them, okay. So what might you do? I copy and paste the assignment brief and then copy and paste the outputs into Word and submitted it, and I pretended that I didn't use AI. I didn't even mention it, okay? So where do you fall on those 4 Ds? Okay, pretty low across all of them. This is the second example of the 4 Ds in action. So this is someone that says, well, I planned and I wrote the assignment, periodically checking the work with an AI assistant. My submitted work detailed and reflected on the use of AI in the process. Okay, this is someone that's being very transparent, aren't they, in what they're doing. It's clear that they are being clear about their delegation, they're describing what they've done. You can see elements of discernment going on, and the transparency is this idea of due diligence. So one final example. I wrote an outline, used AI to fill it out, double-checked all the facts and citations to make sure they're real, turned in what it gave me and said I'd use the tool. Okay? So yes, you tick the diligence box because you're declaring. It's better to have written your own outline, so from the delegation point of view, but too much choice is being made by the AI because you haven't really interacted all the way through. Okay, you might have checked the outputs and the transparency about its use. So yes, that's the diligence bit ticked. But there's limited evidence of discernment. That's perhaps the worst offender here. Checking beyond the facts to what's actually been generated in terms of the argument and the ideas that are being proposed by AI. So these are just 3 examples of the sorts of things that students might think about in terms of their use of AI. What I guess I'm just going to flick back. What I guess I want to say is that these ones are often the easiest to spot. Okay? And students adopt this route for a number of reasons. Sometimes they genuinely don't understand what's going on because they haven't been keeping up with class, they haven't been attending, they haven't been doing pre-reading, doing lots of thinking. Sometimes there's other reasons why you are just very short of time. And this term, it goes unbelievably quickly, doesn't it? You know, we are already in week 5, halfway through term 1. So I think this is the gold standard where you want to be. Yeah, if you're going to use AI and AI is permitted, then really start thinking now about how you plan to use it. And just to end with, here are some sources for you to help you, okay? Do have a look at the WBS ones, yeah? Particularly the WBS policy on AI in assessment. But the other ones you may well find useful to you as well. So, just going to end now to set you up for the last part, which will set you up for the workshop lectures. So, we've talked a lot conceptually about what are ethical issues, and we've talked about how you deal with them from a very technical point of view, the idea of validation and verification, for example, thinking about your data sources. But when you start getting involved in an analytics project, how do you think about the ethical issues that may be relevant? You haven't got down to the coding, you're nowhere near that, but you do need to be thinking about ethical issues. Well, we have a framework called the Business Ethics Canvas that can be used to help you think about the stakeholders that are relevant here, and to help you think through a whole raft of features related to your project, and to identify whether or not these features and these issues pose opportunities for you. In other words, they could be quite positive, or whether they pose risks for you. And this is what the business ethics canvas looks like. What you can see here is descriptors of what goes on in each box. Remember, this is a framework, okay? A framework simply organises ideas. The numbers suggest the way that you go round, okay? You have to start by identifying what it is you're doing. What's the product? What's the feature? What's the enhancement that my project proposes? Who's going to be my users? Who's going to be my customers? And then I can think about stakeholders. Who is going to be affected by or can affect my proposed solution? And then we move round to think about utility. What are the benefits of this solution? Are there any harms? Is anyone likely to be impacted in any way by what we're doing? And then moving down to point number 4, we think about the issue of rights. Are there any rights that we need to take account here? Whose rights are being respected by our solution? But are any rights being infringed? In other words, impacted in a negative way? What about fairness? This is the justice box. How fair is this solution? Now, why might be we interested in fairness? Because it may well treat certain groups or certain individuals in different ways. And yet, I think one of the assumptions of much of our analytics work is that people will get treated the same way. So is this true? Does it treat everyone the same way? Or is there any discrimination or favouritism going on? Common good. Basically, who's involved? What's the community, or what are the communities in which the decision has to be made? What is the notion of common good? And then finally, virtue. How does this define us as a company or me as a human being? What do I want to do, or what do I want to be or become in this situation related to my original solution idea? So the idea of a framework is it's going to guide your thinking and help you record what you're thinking in each of these elements. Now, this comes from a paper and a case study by Vigin et al. So this work was undertaken with an organisation which is actually Trainline. I don't know if you buy your train tickets in the UK from Trainline, but when they wrote up their paper in the European Journal of OR, they wanted to keep the anonymity, so they don't actually declare who they are. They create this fictitious name, Eurotravel. But it's actually a real, genuine application of analytical thinking for the Trainline organisation, who were thinking about a new project. So they wanted to come up with their Days Out project. And in the appendices of these lecture slides, there's a video with the Trainline guy, whose name escapes me at the moment, talking about the project and how it worked and what they did. Now, the idea with the canvas is that you use post-it notes, where yellow represents things that are neutral, green for opportunities, red for risks. So a bit of a traffic light system. So here is an example of a business ethics canvas for the Trainline organisation, or Eurotravel. And you can possibly see the different colours, but mindful that some of you may well be sensitive to the green-red colour distinction, I've included a more neutral colouring slide here. I'm not going to talk you through this one because I want to just leave some space for questions at the end. So just to wrap up, what have we done? We've done an awful lot, haven't we? We've talked about definitions of ethics in business. Is business ethics an oxymoron? Do those terms really belong together? And if so, what do they mean? How is ethics relevant to the field of analytics? And it'd be really interesting to, in the workshops, perhaps to hear some of the reflections of those of you that have many years' work experience in analytics. You know, at what point did you consider the ethics of what you were doing, and how did that work for you? How did you incorporate that in what you did, or didn't you? Did you just get on with doing the coding and you didn't think about whether or not it was ethical or in any way? So we've talked about professional practice and shared the ideas of codes of conduct, but also honed it in to try to make it much more relevant to your own professional practice around the use of AI and thinking about maybe what are some of the ethical issues relevant there. And lastly, we've just done a whistle-stop tour introduction of the Business Ethics Canvas. So on later today, I'm just trying to think of days, and tomorrow in the workshop lectures, we'll be applying this Business Ethics Canvas to some small cases and getting you to develop those and think about what are you going to do with them. You know, if you've done a Business Ethics Canvas, so what? So, as I said, there is a video that you can watch. It's around about 25 minutes long. Ian Randolph, that was the guy's name. There we go. Talking about the how they've used that. Here's some references for you to follow up. And finally, as ever, is this week's quiz. Now, one student emailed me yesterday to say I can't remember if it was the quiz or reflection. I did the quiz or reflections on my phone, and it didn't send. And I noticed late last night it hadn't sent me an email, and it looks as if it hadn't gone through. So my advice would be always check when you've done the quiz or reflections that you've received that confirmation email, because if you haven't, it probably means it hasn't gone through to the system. And the student shared with me that they think it probably will only work for them if they use a computer, a PC or a laptop. So do be aware of that, because I'd hate for you to do the quiz or reflections and then find suddenly that it hasn't gone through for any reason. Now, I have a question there, which is there, I've got to come forward just to see it. Is there a reason why this canvas is outlined like this, like we are moving right to left? I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. I don't know. Watch the video and see if he says anything in there about how it was designed. I guess there's a logic to working clockwise around something. That's a natural, logical route. So maybe that's why they've started in the middle at 12 o'clock and gone round in that clockwise fashion. I've never been asked that question before, so I've never really had to think about that, but I think that's an interesting question. Then we have another point that says, I think in real business world, quite often it's not the consultant, contractor, analyst not being ethical, but the clients themselves having requirements, expectations that are not quite ethical. Do I have any insights to share? Well, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? I guess there's different things that you can say there, isn't there? You know, is your role as the analyst simply to be quite passive and to receive and go off into a little room and do your coding, or is it actually to be the critical friend with the client and say, you know, do you really want to do that? Is it ethical? And you're quite right. I guess there are some organisations that are out there that won't care. That won't care if you say to them, is that really ethical? Because it's biased, it's this, that and the other. Others would perhaps be more mortified and would be grateful that you've pointed it out. I guess if it's the former, you know, what do you do? What do you do? I think that is a real dilemma, isn't it? You know, if somebody is knowingly asking you to behave unethically, I guess the question becomes, how comfortable do you feel about that? You know, in my experience, clients often haven't, you know, they're busy people, they've got 50 million things to be doing, they haven't necessarily thought things through in the logical way, and often are quite grateful that, you know, you're helping them tease out all the tangles and to think things through. I don't know, Eleanor's chipped in here. If you go back to the original business model canvas, the structure helps you to read across to see whether the overall model is coherent. Here the same might be the case, for example, to check that the utility is appropriate to the solution. Okay, we're going back to the structure. So I don't know if those those comments help about unethical clients. I think in life you're always going to find unethical people, aren't you? You're going to find consultants and analysts that will do anything to secure the job and the income coming through for their business. And equally, you may well find clients that are just concerned about making the profit. But not everybody's like that. And if there are organisations like that, as with Cambridge Analytica, you find they run the risk of being whistleblown and the damage to their reputation that followed as a consequence of that. I don't know if, Eleanor, you've any thoughts, or anyone else, if you've any thoughts on that issue?
I think that sometimes if you speak to practitioners, there might be a sort of go, no-go decision as to whether you're willing to take on work for particular organisations. But I would agree that often that is not necessarily in your control as an analyst. Not sure if that helps, but that would be my experience, that, you know, that there are points at which you might decide whether or not you wish to be involved. Sometimes that can be a very difficult place. I do remember personally a time that I refused to do something, and there were times in the following weeks when I thought, why did I bother? It would have been so much easier not to have expressed my view that this disadvantaged a segment of customers and shouldn't be done. So I think it is something that is very personal and very much about what our own values are and what we are prepared to do or not do.
No, it's not meant to be an easy topic, is it? You know, I think it is really one of these where, is there just one right answer? I think it really is one of these where it depends. You know, it depends on where you are in your career. You know, if you've only been there 2 days, are you going to put your head above the parapet? If you are the sole earner of a family, are you going to put your head above the parapet? I think there's an awful lot of it depends. Is this just one person within the organisation, you know, whereas the rest of them are okay? It really does depend. Did you want to add to that, Eleanor?
Yeah, sorry, you know, it's not a question I was expecting this morning, but I suppose one of the things I think about is that when you join an organisation, you want very quickly to establish good relationships with people that you trust, perhaps people not directly in your department, perhaps people to whom you can mention things that concern you in an environment that you feel safe to do so. So I think there's something there about taking a responsibility for creating your own psychologically safe space and a network of people that you would be willing to raise these concerns with, so that then at least you have the reassurance that you're not the only person who has noticed, you're not the only person who knows, and that sometimes you might get the support of somebody more senior or somebody not in your department but in a similar sort of function, if there is something that you feel you ought to raise and you're not really quite sure how best to do that or how to safely do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Eleanor. Any other questions before we sign off? I think we're running out of time. Having said that, I think it's probably best, isn't it, to maybe just to thank you all for listening. If you do have questions, then pick them up in the workshops. Yes, those ESG issues will come through in some of the business ethics canvases that we look at. So thanks everyone, and I'll see some of you later and some of you tomorrow.